Hey, thanks for joining us for Strictly Speaking here on True Blue. I'm Bob Frantz. Good to have you with us. What's the first thing you think of when you hear the name Ashley Babbitt? For a lot of people, they don't think of anything because they never heard the name. They don't recognize it. Maybe they think she's an actress or a pop star or something like that. And that's because most of the mainstream media, they don't want you to know her name. They didn't want you to know the story of her death. They ignored it and they hoped you did too. She died, did Ashley Babbitt, of a gunshot wound to the neck. She was shot by a police officer while unarmed. She was shot while not resisting arrest. She was shot not while not attacking anyone. So why was she shot then? She was shot because the date was January 6th of 2021 and she was at the Capitol and she was trying to enter the building. That's why she was shot. The real question is not why thousands of women went to Washington on January 6th. The real question is why so many others did not. And will anybody remember the legacy of those who suffered the ultimate fate that day, including Ashley Babbitt? There were only a couple of people, and they were not members of the Washington, D.C. Capitol Police. Capitol Police had a different role that day. Jack Cashill is an independent writer and a documentary producer, a media consultant. He's written for Fortune, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, Weekly Standard, American Thinker, and many other publications. He has published 15 books under his own name and collaborated discreetly on 20 others. He's produced a score of documentaries for regional PBS and national cable channels. And today, he's here to talk to us about his newest book, Ashley, the untold story of the women of January 6th, right here on Strictly Speaking. Jack, it's good to have you here. I appreciate you carving out some time for us today. It's an important book that you've written. It's an important topic that, quite frankly, I don't think enough people know about. I gave that a little intro there, and I said, I wonder how many people, if I say the words Ashley Babbitt to them, will know who in the heck she ever was.
And a much smaller percentage will know the name of Roseanne Boyland, who was also killed that day, another female protester.
Yeah, that's the reason I kind of said it the way I did in the intro. There were a couple of people who died that day, but according to the media narrative and according to a lot of the people who are driven by partisan politics, they think that police officers were killed that day, that Trump supporters and insurrectionists killed police officers, and nothing could be further from the truth. There were two people killed that day, and they were both protesters who were there to, well, in their mind, try to stop a travesty from taking place by begging for a halt to the certification of a vote.
You know, Bob, you're absolutely right. And that brings up what I would consider the most ghoulish hoax in the history of American politics, and that is the murder of police officer Brian Sicknick. The problem for the administration, not the administration, the powers that be on January 6th was that they had created a martyr. They didn't intend to. Ashley Babbitt was like poster child for what the conservative movement represented. 14-year Air Force veteran, attractive, married, young woman, unarmed, shot and killed without warning by a Capitol police officer. So what let's just call them the conspirators did immediately afterwards, is they decided they need a martyr of their own. And one of the women I profiled in this book, a woman named Sarah Carpenter, gave me an insight into how this happened. She was NYPD retired. She's driving back to New York after the events on January 6th. She was inside the Capitol. And she calls a friend who lives in Maryland off the road near the highway and just admits, says where she was that day, thinking she might just stop by and say hello. And the friend freaks out. And she tells Sarah, "You killed a Capitol police officer today. You killed a Capitol police officer with a fire hydrant. I mean, a fire extinguisher."
Fire extinguisher.
And Sarah is taken aback because she thought it was a kind of a festive day. She had a good time, like a lot of people did. And this woman's husband was a retired Capitol police officer. So Sarah believed that she had an inside track. This is on the night of January 6th. And Sarah's distraught. She can't even get out of bed the next day because she doesn't want to be, implicated in a lethal insurrection. She's a police officer. Well, the next day, on January 7th, Brian Sicknick, a Trump supporter, military veteran, he dies of a stroke, a series of strokes, totally organic, natural cause. This would show up in his autopsy report. And On January 8th, the morning of January 8th, the New York Times reports that, according to two law enforcement officials, Brian Sicknick was hit over the head by pro Trump supporters with a fire extinguisher and was rushed out of the Capitol. And they add this kind of ghastly detail to show you this is not just a miscommunication. They said he had a huge gash in his head and blood was flowing out when he was taken out of the Capitol on January 6th. Sicknick went home live and well on January 6th, the night of. They concocted a false martyr to counteract the real martyr of Ashley Babbitt. So Ashley Babbitt's story was lost, and the Brian Sicknick story was, embellished not only with a memorial in the rotunda of the plaza, the Capitol, first person since Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a burial at Arlington with full military honors. And then, even more ghoulishly, over the next year, 4 Capitol police officers would commit suicide. And rather than inquiring, why are these guys committing suicide? They just kept adding them onto the list of people killed on January 6th. Merrick Garland says 5, Biden said 5. Prosecutors were telling juries that 5 people were killed as a result of January 6th. It was really grotesque, and they've more or less gotten away with it.
Well, yeah, because there's no curious media anymore, which is kind of the point here. I mean, you just brought it up what the New York Times did with the story of Sicknick, in making it up on a whole cloth. I mean, it's not even embellishing; it's fabricating out of nothing a story that did not happen. I don't know where they got this fire extinguisher story, but you're right. They published it. They described the gruesome details of the beating that he took with this thing, and fortunately, due to the release of some of the, I don't know, what were there, 44,000 hours of collectively of video footage of the day, but we got some of it released under former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and we have seen, I remember Tucker Carlson featured
Right.
Brian Sicknick following him around, throughout the rest of that evening. He was
Yeah.
never harmed. He was perfectly fine. He didn't get beaten and so forth. But the media, Jack, has just decided we're not going to report the facts because the facts might not take us where we want them to. So we'll make up our own. And I don't know. I don't know how you counter that.
Well, it's difficult, especially when you have a cooperative medical examiner's office in Washington, D.C. So they sat on the autopsy report for more than 100 days until it was forced out by a suit by Judicial Watch. So for 100 days, that murder story was allowed to marinate. And then when it did come out, the media said to by that time, the Biden administration, DOJ, had taken over, and they're saying, "I thought you said he was killed by a fire extinguisher, right?" Without any kind of outrage or any kind of sense of like, yeah, we've been had. Well, they get had just for the last 4 years. They've been had every other day. When Biden shows up sharp as a tack. So yeah, it's a media problem for me, Bob, and for you too. Let's face it, it's an opportunity because we get to tell stories that the major media should be telling, but it's not.
Yeah, no question about it. And, Jack, you talk about the word martyr. And they did. They kind of tried to use Brian Sicknick as a martyr. He was one who sacrificed himself defending democracy and
Right.
defending the Capitol from this mob of insurrectionists. And people were so willing to grab onto that. But as you say, and as you read about in your book, which I want to talk about in depth, Ashley Babbitt was the real martyr that day, but was she? Because I mean, to me, and I don't have a dictionary in front of me, the definition of martyr, though, is someone whose death was given willingly and in a sacrificial manner to inspire others to do good things. That's a very loose definition. A martyr is somebody who loses their life in a righteous cause to lift other people. But they have stolen martyrdom from her because nobody will tell her story. Obviously not including you and some people who are doing some work in documentary films, but the mainstream media, which reaches everybody's doorstep, they don't want you to know about how Ashley Babbitt died. And that's why I still think if you were to poll 1,000 people randomly across this country, you might get a couple hundred of them, maybe 2 of every 10 that would actually know her name.
No, Bob, your point's well made. She was not a willing martyr. To the degree she was a martyr was her willingness to go to Washington. She lived in San Diego,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and she just put everything on hold and said, "I have to go to Washington and have my voice heard." I ended up profiling 10 women 8 of whom survived that day, and all 8 of whom cooperated with me. Thank goodness. I was surprised that they would. What they had in common was they were more observant than the average American, more aware, certainly more than the average liberal woman who is, who relishes their own ignorance. These women, it's incredible. I'm talking here about educated liberal females in particular, elves, as I call them. But these women knew about the Russia collusion hoax. They knew it was a fraud. They knew about the 51 intel officers who, dismissed the Biden laptop as a Russian hack job. They were aware of these things. And if you're alone in San Diego, actually, Ashley was married. Her husband had to mind the store, literally. You make this effort. You say, I have to go and have my voice heard one last time. The one thing Ashley Babbitt surely was not, and I know this from having researched it well, was an insurrectionist. When she leaps into that window frame before she's killed, the last thing in her mind is to lead an insurrection. Because she was a police officer in the military for 14 years. And she gets to that lobby where it's a crowded corridor, behind which is the speaker's lobby. When she arrives there, Bob, there's 3 Capitol police officers who are overmatched that day. They have no idea what they're doing. They're usually parking valets and, giving tour guides and whatnot. And she's the first one there. She's joking with them, talking about their job. And then the lobby fills up with people, some of whom are not friendlies, some of whom are not Trump people, at least 2 of whom. And the mob gets tighter and tighter. She's getting pressed in there. And so she goes to the Capitol Police. This is all captured on video. And she says, do your effing job, call for effing backup. And she's shaking them and, saying, do something, right? Because they're not doing their work the way she would do their work. And what did they do instead is they just walk away from the doors and leave them unguarded. And at that point, this one guy who had been just punching the windows grabs a helmet and knocks the window out. At that point, Ashley Babbitt, this guy's named Zachary Lamb, multiple arrest record, no connection to MAGA or Trump. She grabs his backpack, pulls him around. She's a left-hander. She punches him in the face, knocks his glasses off. And at that point, she escapes that crowd and jumps into the window frame. I mean, the best evidence would suggest that she was afraid of being smothered, trapped in a crowd. Roseanne Boylan died that way, being smothered by a crowd. So whatever her motive was, it was not to lead that group of people into the speaker's lobby behind those doors.
That's a great recounting of it. And going a little bit deeper into it, the view that people who are less than sympathetic to Ashley Babbitt or anybody else who was caught up in all of that on January 6th is that if she would have just complied and not gone into a building without authority, she wasn't one of the ones that was escorted in through one of the side doors on one of the other faces of the building, which of course we have seen those videos as well. Police were standing there, moving aside and ushering people in and saying, go ahead in, just don't break anything. It was a very casual type of situation, but she was in the front and on the face where literally, as you say, the window had been knocked out,
right?
And she was trying to climb through it. So she's the face of, hey, you should have known you weren't allowed to go in when somebody smashed a window. But what nobody tells is the story you just told. She was caught between a massive crush of people who were all being encouraged, let's go, let's go, let's go,
right,
by what numerous people have described as feds and people who were there to try to ramp up that crowd. But she was pressed between that and a door whose window had just been knocked out. So she's got a choice, get crushed by it or go through it. That's, like you say, that's not leading an insurrection. She wasn't disobeying orders or trying to breaking and entering. She was in a tough spot there, wasn't she?
She was, and no one said, including the guy who shot her, stop or I'll shoot. She didn't have a chance. She was small enough. She's only 5'2", 100 pounds to jump into that window frame. You and I would be, stuck in the middle of it. We wouldn't be able to
Yeah.
And then Michael Byrd, the Capitol Police lieutenant at the time, now Captain Michael Byrd, he was promoted for his good work that day, just shoots and kills her, which is why there's a suit going on right now in Washington, brought by her husband, Aaron, Babbitt and the Judicial Watch for wrongful death. And by any standard, it was a bad shoot. Had that happened on the streets of, say, Minneapolis, where we have a new VP candidate from, um, they'd end up in prison with Derek Chauvin, who doesn't deserve to be there. But that's a story for another day.
And we can have a part of that conversation a little bit later today, actually, because that is some breaking news. But I find it even more interesting and coincidental that you and I are talking at the time of this conversation. That, in fact, in about 45 minutes or so, that case is going to be heard, or at least a hearing in that case is going to be heard. The lawsuit, it's a $30 million wrongful death lawsuit
Yeah,
filed by her husband on behalf of Ashley Babbitt. And of course, no amount of money, even if they are successful, will bring that back. But this is being held in Washington, D.C., the same place
right.
where 95% of the residents there vote Democrat, the same place where every single J6 defendant who has had a trial there doesn't have a chance in hell because it is so incredibly one sided there. So if people are looking for justice for Ashley, they're probably not going to find it in a courtroom,
Not in
but they can
Washington.
find it.
And they
They
moved
can
that to
find
San
it in
Diego.
their.
They
Go
filed the
ahead.
suit originally in San Diego, where Ashley lives. It's a natural place to file that suit, and the
Sure.
and the government moved it to Washington.
Yeah, with obvious intentions.
Sure.
But where she can find justice though is in the truth, reaching as many people as possible. Which is why I'm so glad you wrote this book and why I want to have this conversation. Um, let's talk about Bird again. Let's talk about what he did at that moment. He did not, as you say, give her a chance to follow an order such as stop, don't take another step, don't take
Right.
another movement to get through that building, stop right there, get back. Nothing. He just shot her. And I think what you said is true. Had this happened in Minneapolis or something like that, I would even say if it had happened in the same place it was, but if it were a Democratic, supporting blue hat wearer,
Right.
metaphorically, instead of Ashley Babbitt, and also in particular, if she had been a black woman instead of a white woman, talking about Ashley Babbitt, shot unarmed by a cop in a situation like that, we have a very different conversation here, don't we?
Right. And the cop was black. I mean, so it was an interracial killing, but it would be a totally different conversation because we know what happened to let's say, the women who obstructed the Kavanaugh hearings, for instance. Uh, they did what the J6 is accused of, interfering with an official proceeding. That was a 3-year prison sentence for the J6ers, for the Harris people, and excuse me, they actively intervened in the hearing. Mike Pence had to, shut them down a few times and stop the proceedings. Mike Pence may be the cause of all these things because he's always seems to be there when things go wrong. But $30 to $50 fines, right? That's what they got. $30 to $50 fines. And these women of January 6th and the men as well, the men got stiffer sentences than the women, as
Yeah.
on average. What the women got was more brutal behavior by the cops. Something about their presence brought out the violence in the police officers, men and women police officers. Victoria White, one of the women I profile, who suffered the most, I would say, brutal police beating ever captured on video of a woman, beaten bloody, hitting 20, 30, 40 times. I asked her, why were they so tough on women? And she said rather, that she thought that they were trying to provoke the men to respond. And in her case, she's right, because the guy who tried to save her got 6 years in prison. So they may not have been that thoughtful about it. And maybe that the stereotype they had of women, that women should be on the left, not on the right, that they should be compliant, wearing their masks all the time and, scolding people who don't, just provoke them. And so the two women who were most brutally killed the two people most brutally killed were women. A third man was arguably killed by police action. That was Kevin Greason when a flashbang blew up in his face and had a heart attack. But the second woman killed, Roseanne Boylan, her beating is also just stunning. It's captured on video. The police woman who beat her should be in prison. Her case is much less defendable than Michael Bird's. Roseanne Boylan gets, these crowd surges happen, and if you weigh 110 pounds or something, you're not going to resist it. You just get pushed, and you're lucky if you survive them. Sometimes it's like Happens at soccer games and stuff also. Roseanne Boylan gets pushed into this tunnel entrance. The police make a countercharge. First they spray some sort of toxic substance, and people are fainting just from that. She gets pushed down a flight of stairs by the police. The crowd does. She ends up the bottom of the pile, and then when she's pulled out, finally, she's either dead or dying. She's certainly unconscious. She's
Yeah.
for a second, and this woman police officer picks up a stick and starts beating her over the head, like it was a sledgehammer, and she was a pile of concrete. And she beat her so hard that the stick broke in half and flew out of her hand. And she gets sent to the Super Bowl as a guest of honor a month later in recognition of her heroism. She's still in the police force. Her name's Lila Morris, and she's on the Metropolitan D.C. Police Force. And
Yeah.
no punishment,
And Bird, as you said, was promoted to captain,
Yeah.
which is, this is a difficult conversation too for me because this is a true crime channel that we're on here, and we do a lot of pro police stuff, and not for the sake of being pro police, but to provide the balance of all of the anti police attitude and the
Sure.
defund and abolish and everything else that's out there. But we cannot stand up for good cops unless we point out the bad actions of the bad ones. And what you're doing right now is incredibly important. Roseanne Boylan, as you said, was completely unconscious. She was not able to resist. It wasn't as though she was trying to get up while she was being hit and thus
Yeah.
making herself a threat. She was laying there unconscious, and she took that beating. And to the point that you made a moment ago, um, you don't know if they were that thoughtful about it, or trying to be provocative into trying to provoke the men into doing something. I think they were. I talked to Nick Searcy on the show, who
Yeah.
did one of
I
the
know Nick. Yeah. Friend.
yeah, and he did one of the documentaries on January 6th, and we
Sure.
talked about exactly that. So many of the actions taken by the police that day were indeed intentionally provocative. When they started firing beanbags into the crowd and then actually live rounds, um, it was without cause at that point, and the goal was fire them up. And I'm paraphrasing Nick, but fire them up and piss them off to the point where they will do something and get really, really bad, so that they can have the story that they came there to tell that day. Now, I don't know if the DC Capitol Police were necessarily on comms with the feds that were in the crowd,
No.
but they sure as hell ended up working together. Whether that was the intent or not, that's what they did.
You're absolutely right. By the way, my father's a police officer, my uncle, several of my cousins. I've written pro police stuff. In fact, when I told my daughter that I was going to do a book, she said, "Don't do it on Derek Chauvin Day." I said, "Okay," because I've been arguing on Derek Chauvin's behalf. So, and when I told her it was on Ashley Babbitt, she said, "Oh, phew," she was relieved.
Did you since you brought up Chauvin, did you see the documentary The Fall of
Oh
Minneapolis?
yeah, yeah. I watched a
Yeah.
couple times, and I've written
Yeah.
extensively about that case. And there's one very interesting cross current between the Chauvin case and the DC case, and that is the medical examiner. On January 6, 2021, was a guy named Roger Mitchell, black activist. He was also deputy mayor of DC, very influential guy. In, let's say, in May of 2020, Mitchell calls Andrew Baker, who's the medical examiner in Minneapolis. And when he saw the preliminary autopsy report, which said no strangulation, no asphyxiation, and Roger Mitchell would brag about this to state prosecutors, by the way, who worked under Governor Tim Walz and
Right.
and Keith Ellison. So he would later brag to them about this. This is how we know about it. He said, "Yeah, I called Baker up. I said, if you don't change that, if you don't amend that autopsy report, I'm going to run a op-ed in the Washington Post. I'm going to disgrace you. I'm going to ruin your reputation." And the whole atmosphere is totally fraught with fear already, right? So Baker finally yields and he amends the autopsy report from the preliminary, adds neck compression, and gives the Minnesota prosecutors just enough leeway they need to accuse Chauvin of murder. Then medical examiner Roger Mitchell's in Washington now on the January 6, 2021. His office is the one that suppresses the autopsy report for more than 100 days. They suppressed the autopsy report of Roseanne Boylan for more than 90 days. Both cases to conceal the evidence in these cases, and and he's still running around, probably getting speaker fees and whatnot.
Is there any lawsuit being filed on behalf of Roseanne?
Roseanne's case is interesting, and the my source on this because I she hers was the one family that I could not get to cooperate, uh, and I think it was because there's divided loyalties inside the family.
Hmm.
The father was Brett.
Politically,
What's that?
politically speaking, is that
Yeah,
what you mean by the
yeah.
divided loyalty?
Certainly on January 6th, the father
Mhm.
was supportive of Roseanne's turn to the right, and he she voted for the first time in November 2020. And her father said it was the happiest day of her life, because she had a history of drug addiction, and she was on parole. She couldn't vote. She comes from a very good family, though, and they were very supportive of her, including her two sisters, both of whom were big liberals. So, as was her brother-in-law, the Justin Cave. So after the January 6th, and they get the message that Roseanne died. Justin Cave reaches out to MSNBC, where a high school buddy is an anchor, a guy named Ayman Mohyeddin. And Mohyeddin looks like, oh boy, this is a great opportunity because Justin Cave wants to know how their daughter fell under Trump's sway and QAnon and all that stuff, right? So MSNBC does a an invaluable 5-part podcast on the death of Roseanne Boylan. And what they find out, they wanted to go into examine QAnon and the pull, the lure, the seduction of poor Roseanne Boylan. What they found out instead is that the prosecutors and the police are stonewalling them at every turn. They won't tell them how she died or why she died. And finally, the two sisters get fed up with MSNBC because they want to find out what happened to their sister. MSNBC wants to find out about QAnon, right? But in the process, they did a lot of good reporting and it was against their interest because every step they took, they found out, for instance, that when they finally get the autopsy report after 90 days,
Mhm.
it says she dies of a amphetamine overdose. And they say, even MSNBC is saying, well, what about all the video evidence we're seeing of her being beaten and smothered and all this? No, 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 it was amphetamine overdose. Well, she took ADHD. She had ADHD. She was taking Adderall. That's where whatever degree that substance shows up in her blood system. So
Right.
finally, and the greatest possible rebuke to MSNBC, the Roseanne sisters begin working with Gateway Pundit, right? Because Gateway Pundit was more interested in the truth than MSNBC was. But it's a fascinating part of the story, and it just goes to show you the depth of corruption in that whole enterprise in Washington. I mean, and you're right too, Bob. It's not just a force, coordinating some great conspiracy. There are so many entities involved, working at their own purposes. Medical examiner, the DOJ, the Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police, the FBI. Rogue operatives in the crowd who were probably self-actualized, who were, there just to make trouble. And I identify a few of them in the book that had not previously been identified. I think the DNC had bird doggers in there, trying to provoke the crowd. That is
I've
homeless
no
people. They
Yeah.
bat to and send them in.
Why do you think it is that they did not have National Guard protection? Much has been made of requests that supposedly were made by Trump saying, hey, look, I'm going to be having a large crowd there protesting the certification of this thing. Make sure it doesn't get out of hand. Put some guards there. And apparently, either Muriel Bowser, the mayor of DC, or Nancy Pelosi, the speaker, or between the two of them, they said no, they didn't want it. Did you get to the bottom of that in your research?
As far as I could. And to me, the real culprits are in the Pentagon. Um, And, I had to change my opinion on Nancy Pelosi when that video surfaced of her talking to her daughter, the videographer,
Yeah.
right after at about 3 p.m. that afternoon.
In
She
the
knew
car.
she had screwed up. She knew that as the Speaker of the House, she is the one responsible for security at the Capitol. The sergeant at arms reports to her. And they, not since 1812 had someone screwed up that badly in a position of power in Washington. It wasn't until later that she realized the political value of the media turning this into an insurrection. But
That's a great point.
I mean, and there's a lot of people who are to blame for this, but the real foot dragging, the conscious foot dragging, was done at the Pentagon, and and I think they had like a lot of people involved had a vested interest in embarrassing Donald Trump and creating and fomenting chaos. Whistleblower Stephen Friend, the FBI whistleblower, was asked
Mhm.
this question, and he said, "Don't look for a single individual coordinating this. Look, there are many hands involved in this." And it's, I'm paraphrasing, but uh, there are
I
many
don't know if that's better or worse. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse. I mean,
more.
because
you know?
well, right. I mean, if there was one, evil entity kind of coordinating everything and everybody went along with it, that would be terrible. But the idea that so many other people were either corrupt or inept or both, that this just perfect storm of crap kind of all developed that day between the feds that the Capitol Police Chief at the time said were in that crowd. He said as many as 100 were there, along with the DNC bird dogs, as well as the others, who are and there were some bad people, by the way.
Of
That's the
ours,
one thing nobody ever talks about. If you're I don't want to call it a supporter, but if you are looking out for justice, true justice, and what happened that day, which is what I am, and I feel like that's what you and others who are doing the work on this are doing. You're looking at Roseanne Boylan and Ashley Babbitt, and you're looking at all the victims, and you're feeling terrible. But we don't hide from the fact that there were some people there who were indeed Trump supporters, or wearing the red hats, and who just wanted to stop this whole thing from happening. These bad people did bad things, should be punished according to the letter of the law. But I feel like that is a very, very, very tiny percentage of the people who went there that day to make as Trump said to them at the speech, make your voices heard peacefully and patriotically.
right? It's you're absolutely right about that. There were some bad actors there who were legitimate Trump supporters.
Yes.
Uh, a lot of people just got riled up once the police started, shooting, flashbangs into the crowd and rubber bullets and whatnot.
And
Uh,
attacking women to the
and
point before. A
right,
lot of men got very, very defensive of that.
that's right. And the crowd though is almost overwhelmingly pro police, including Ashley Babbitt. And but there is, at the end of the day, I came to believe that there was an element of an inside job that was somewhat coordinated, uh, and everything that revolves around the witching hour of 1 p.m. to me is suspicious. Several things happen at 1 p.m., just minutes before and minutes afterwards. Ray Epps, who doesn't go to the Trump speech, is leading his own ad hoc crew. That's the Metropolitan Police said, an ad hoc mob. Being led by Ray Epps, shows up at the Capitol perimeter and breaches the Capitol perimeter a few minutes before 1. The one guy runs around, pulls down all those restricted fencing signs at just a couple minutes before 1.
Yep.
Uh, we only know about Ray Epps because he was forced out by our side, right? Otherwise, he would have disappeared like everyone else. At 1 p.m., uh, the fellow who's visually, easily identifiable, if you wanted to identify him, hangs the noose on a gallows that had been set up earlier, 5 hours earlier on the Capitol grounds, and allowed to sit there all day. One guy told me, he said, "Hey, I once tried to set up a volleyball net on that grounds, and they took it down in 5 minutes." They have a gallows sitting there for 5 hours, perfectly framed with the Capitol in the background, great optics for the media. At 1 o'clock, still unidentified man climbs up on top of the scaffolding for the inauguration, and starts saying, come on, we have to go into the Capitol." Still unidentified. At 1 o'clock, the still unidentified bombs are found, both at the RNC and DNC. Uh, and I think where their plans went somewhat awry is because Donald Trump, for I don't know, who knows, Donald Trump does things sometimes that work to his advantage. You never know why. He was supposed to begin his speech at 11 o'clock, 11 a.m. Had he begun on time, it's a 45-minute walk from the ellipse to the Capitol.
Mhm.
Had he begun on time, all of those thousands of people would have arrived at the Capitol just at 1 o'clock, just when all the breach was coming, just when the bombs were discovered, the noose went up, etc. Instead, he begins an hour late. Now, what this means, Bob, is that the J6 House Committee and the Jack Smith indictment totally ignored their own timeline. They know for instance, that at 1:10 p.m., the line that they indict him for, when Trump says, "We got to fight like hell, fight like hell, fight like hell," says it just before the end of his speech at 1:10 p.m. Well, 45 minutes away, uh, at 1:06 p.m., the Capitol Police are already lobbing munitions into this crowd of protesters. They didn't go to Trump's speech. They never heard Trump's speech. They're 45 minutes away. Ashley Babbitt, we know her timeline well because of the lawsuit, but she stayed till the end of the speech, like most Trump fans did. She doesn't get to the Capitol till 2:20. So, and because it's a long walk, a lot of people, and so the whole notion that he incited these people is utterly bogus, and the media have gotten away with that, and it's really a shame they have.
Yeah, well, it really is, and especially because what we're talking about took the lives
Yeah,
of two women on that day, and their loss is being hidden by the agenda here of all of those that we're talking about right now, and the idea, and again, I'm preaching to the choir here, and this is old stuff, but the idea that fight like hell is to be taken literally, even if though, and you're right, you just brought out the timeline at 1:06 p.m. They're already there. They're already engaged. They're lobbing the tear gas and everything else. And Trump is still speaking over here. But even if they had heard that and then went there, what does that mean?
no, I
In
mean,
the same way that everybody says we got to fight for the country, it means metaphorically, it means verbally, it means we've got to, talk to our members of Congress, we've got to vote, we've got to knock doors, we got to fight for for what we believe in. The idea that fight means go there and attack cops, break windows, go inside and hang Mike Pence. It's just so ludicrous.
it is,
And
and
they
just like
have to
when
they
after
have to have
Fukushima,
that ludicrous
right?
story. They have to keep telling that story to explain why the things that did happen had to happen.
That's
That's
right.
that's
They have to repeat the narrative over and over again. 5 cops killed, blah blah blah, uh,
yeah,
and yet it's faded. They've lost grip on the story, not entirely, but to a large degree. Just like Trump after he shot, fight, fight, fight. Of course. When you
exactly.
is he trying to incite the crowd to attack the Secret Service? No, of course not.
Thank you. You're saying the same thing that I said on the radio, and that's exactly right. I mean, we are talking about. Remember, we're talking about, a party, and we're talking about the Democrat Party at the time that had the Senate Majority Leader. I'm sorry, at the time, I guess he was the Minority Leader. Threatening Supreme Court justices.
Right.
I'm talking to you, Kavanaugh, and you, Gorsuch. If you keep making decisions like this, you are going to pay the price. You're going to reap the whirlwind.
Good
And I'm
point.
thinking,
Yeah,
you know, you know, pay the price to an elected official might very well mean at the ballot box, we're going to vote you out. But you're talking about justices who are appointed for life. Pay the price can only mean something different,
that's right.
which might be more of a physical threat. He
And
got nothing.
there's
He got
been
nothing.
physical threats, right? The and one other interesting thing is I profile 10 women in this book,
Mhm.
but there's an 11th woman who has the potential to unravel the whole story, from unravel the left's narrative on this, and that is none other than Kamala Harris. So,
Mm.
uh, and this is kind of fascinating. I just learning more about this because it's been in the news the last couple of days, and they're reviewing the Secret Service performance at Butler, PA. They end up reviewing their performance on January 6th because Kamala Harris, unknown to any conspirator, I would say she was not part of any plot. I think she stumbled into a plot underway. She's at the DNC at 1 p.m., the witching hour. And so that means the Secret Service is there. That means the Secret Service had done a sweep at the building, two of them with dogs, right? Didn't find the bomb. So they evacuate her at like 1:15 or something. And then she goes to some undisclosed location. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with her being at DNC, nothing wrong with her going to some undisclosed location. But unlike every other Democrat, she never milked the opportunity to say she was within 20 feet of the bomb. She could have been blown up. AOC said she thought she was going to be raped, but that's narcissism on display. Uh, but here's what Kamala Harris didn't do. She didn't tell anyone, neither Biden did nor did Biden, that other than that she was at the Capitol. So everyone was led to believe she was at the Capitol during the riot, and as a Secret Service protectee, she was designated as a restricted space. So anyone who was at the Capitol inside that building was impinging on her restricted space and was vulnerable criminally vulnerable for doing that. So what that meant is for a year, uh, scores of people, maybe hundreds, were had their charges ratcheted up for impinging on Kamala Harris's restricted space. A year after the fact, on January 6, 2022, Politico finally breaks the story that she wasn't at the Capitol. She was someplace else, and that she was at the DNC earlier.
DNC.
And so that meant that the prosecutors had to amend all of these cases, right? They had to amend all their filings. And of course, they tried to keep the level of punishment up to, as on par. They found some other reason. But for a year, every case that was brought before the judges in DC was tainted by her unwillingness to say where she was. And to this day, she has not talked about her presence at the DNC. I think she got in the way of the bomb plot. I think she blew that all up. And
Wow.
but now I'm speculating here. So everything else I've told you is fact. This is a speculation.
Right. No, but it's an important one, and with all the research you've done, you've got some some reason behind your thoughts, and your opinions on that. So going back to Ashley, which is where we started this whole thing, and you obviously put her name in the title of the book.
All right.
What do you expect the result of this trial will be? I know we talked about the fact that they moved it from San Diego to DC, which means it's going to be tainted. In my view, it's going to be tainted by probably a left wing judge and a left wing jury, if it even gets to that point. Or do you think there's any chance that there's a settlement there, just so they don't have to go through all this?
No, I think they'll throw it out unless unless it drags on, unless Trump is elected, unless attention is paid. But one unnerving thing I saw the other day watching the Secret Service hearings, they had Ray, FBI Director Ray up there. He was bragging about how they had 800 people who pled guilty, right? On January 6 people, implying that they knew they were guilty and they took the plea, right? Well, the reason they pled guilty is because they knew that if they went to trial, they'd spend years in prison.
Exactly.
And the reason they knew that is because every single person who went to trial before a jury was convicted. Every single one.
Of
And
course.
none of them were allowed to change venue. So
That-
this is assembly line justice. This is Soviet style justice.
Yeah, you just hit it on the head. They were not allowed to have a change of venue because they knew the judge, the judges there who were making those decisions knew that if one of them got a change of venue and went somewhere else, anywhere else, and got a not guilty, got an acquittal, it makes all of the convictions that they had hammered that gavel down on in Washington D.C. look suspect now. Because the fact is that there was never going to be an impartial jury of their peers for any of these people. These people were despised. They were coming from all around the country, descending on left wing Washington D.C. and then daring to challenge the reins of power there, even if it wasn't supposed to be what it was. Even to be there and just do the protesting part, they were going to pay the price there. And Ashley Babbitt, again, I keep coming back to Ashley Babbitt and what she died for. I think we know why they not only killed her, but why they have done what they have done since then. Because how many Americans do you think, if they're Trump supporters or if they're conservative minded people, are going to go to rallies in Washington, D.C. again? You think that anybody else will ever go and be a part of an uprising of any kind, even if it is just to lift your voices in opposition to something? I think the goal here is to punish in advance, essentially, anybody who would ever think about stepping up against the government again.
Right, because the people, I would say one of the heartening facts about my interviews with these women is that not a single one of them regretted being in Washington, D.C. that day. Not a single one of them said, oh, Trump led me astray or anything like that. This is true virtually of all the J6ers. But a lot of them said, we think it's now a trap. We thought we're trapped. We thought
Yes.
we're up. And to your point, yeah, people are going to say, oh, we're going to have a big rally. I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, they took it, they took it into the suburbs now too, into the parking lots at school board meetings. You had FBI agents out there in Virginia looking at license plates, digging people up, trying to see what can we get into if these people are in there causing havoc, if they're in there threatening school board members and so on and so forth, we're going to make their lives miserable to the point where the First Amendment is now null and void. Yeah, it might be there on paper, but everybody is afraid to raise their voice if they know the feds are looking down on them.
Right. Or as in Kamala Harris proved in California, the state officials, where, I was just writing today about the case of David Daleiden, who did the undercover reporting on the baby parts trafficking videos.
Oh,
And
right, right, right.
I watched all these videos. I've reported on this story. Um, they're horrifying. Even Hillary Clinton said the videos were disturbing, right? So they had to be pretty bad. But she was the attorney general then. She sent in a dozen, state police or whatever, DOJ people and California people, and had Daleiden arrested, seized all his material. He's still awaiting trial 8 years later. Uh, it's the Gestapo like uh, sort of tendencies of the Democrats today is not to be underestimated. It's not an exaggeration to call them Gestapo like.
No,
You see
no,
what they've done.
I agree with you 100%. And one of the other, and I've had some people on about this too, but I would certainly welcome your perspective on the J6ers who are still being held in what we can only call gulags without their trials. Jake Lang, I think, just crossed his like 1400th consecutive day of being imprisoned without facing charges or without facing a trial. He has not had his constitutional rights to a speedy trial or to representation or anything else met, not to mention everything that he's enduring, from what I understand. Can't prove that, but the point is, we can prove he's been held now for 4 years, about 4 years, without a trial.
Yeah, I just saw his post. I forget how many consecutive days it was, but yeah, it's close to 4 years now. By the way, and he was like the leader of the people trying to save Roseanne Boyland,
Roseanne Boyland, yes.
which called attention to him, to himself, which made him, vulnerable to the sedition hunters, these amateur goons who helped the FBI identify people at J6. Um, really, and you read the history of the left historically, they were against people who named names and betrayed their friends and, betrayed their causes. Now they're championing, snitches, right? It's
Yeah, very much so. So what do you think is going to happen with those folks, Jack? I mean, again, we're trying to figure out what justice means anymore for the people of January 6th. And we're talking about for the victims of January 6th. And quite frankly, I think Jake Lang, whose only crime, to my understanding, was trying to stop Roseanne Boyland from being beaten to death,
yeah.
and protecting her a little bit. Where is justice for him, and who is going for it? I even left wing, I'm sorry, conservative minded members of Congress that I've spoken to, I've said, what are you doing for these guys? Get him his trial at the bare minimum. And I get nothing. I get
So
nothing at all.
I would say it's been a disappointing response from members of Congress, almost entirely across the board. Uh, I think, I mean, a lot depends on what happens in November, right? And if Trump wins, I think we'll face a bit of insurrection on the left, but I think it will not succeed. And I think he will pardon um, all but a handful of J6ers, the ones who actually committed real violence. And so the justice, to a certain degree, will be had. I don't think there'll ever be, you can make up for years that you spent in prison. However, it is a formative experience, if you're willing I've talked to people who've been in prison who feel like they profited from the experience, at least in terms of building character. It ruins your life, of course, it bankrupts you, and several people have committed suicide.
Suicides, yeah.
But I think, I'd be satisfied with a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, South Africa style, where, what they did there after the fall of apartheid is they allowed they allowed amnesty for the people in the apartheid regime if they told the truth about what they knew and what happened. Because right now, in DC, where 95% of the people voted for against Trump both times he ran,
Yeah.
there's not going to be any justice going through the DC courts. You're not going to put James Comey in trial? No, it's not going to happen. No one gets acquitted on our side. No one gets convicted on their side. And
Yeah.
so right now, it's not justice at all. No more justice than you get in 1938 Moscow, literally. In fact, those guys probably had a better chance, you know.
Yeah.
So,
No, I
so
think
much
that's.
since it's on November, I would just say everyone get out and vote, you know.
Do you think there's going to be a civil war? And I don't mean like the kind that we had in 1860, 61, and through 65. I mean where there's battle lines north and south, but I mean in spots, in zones, hot zones where, for example, Charlottesville, you had people on the left who are very bad people, they're black clad, helmeted, bat carrying Antifa side, and the tiki torch carrying right, KKK and neo Nazis and everything else, where they clashed, obviously, and that led to one of the biggest lies I think in modern political history.
Biden
But
launched his campaign on that lie.
he did. That's what he said. It's the whole reason he decided to run is because Donald Trump said that there were fine people carrying tiki torches. Uh, but and then of course what happened on January 6th? Yes, there were insurrectionists there, not insurrectionists, beg your pardon. Yes, there were people there who were the feds who I think were trying to fire these people up. But there was Antifa there. There were some bad people there, and then there were a whole lot of patriots who were just there to make their voices heard who got caught up in the mix. My
Right.
point being, if Trump wins, I feel like the left will not accept. You kind of jokingly said, there may be a slight insurrection on the left here, but in the form of in Chicago or in New York or in San Francisco, in some really big cities where there's a lot of hot tempers and a lot of really, really angry, we hate MAGA movements, I just wonder if there aren't going to be more of those types of clashes at public events. That
Yes.
type of.
I would say there will be what will appear to have like civil war potential. Here's the problem for the left. Their battlegrounds are their own. You know, they destroy their own buildings, their own institutions, their own stores, their own, like they have done in Minneapolis under the wonderful guidance of Governor Tim Walz. Uh, at the end of their rioting or demonstrating, protesting, their neighborhoods and their cities are destroyed. Uh, they wouldn't. It would be very difficult for them to take the battle to the right because the right is scattered. I mean, I'm here in Chautauqua County, New York, not far from you. This is a plus 20 Trump County. Uh, the rural people, it's plus 40 Trump County. They're all armed, right? The left, the average leftist isn't armed. I mean, they could arm up, but they don't have, as they do in England, say, where it is scary, an ethnic mass capable of causing real havoc and sustaining it. We don't have that here, really. The if we have if the one silver lining on our immigration issue is these people are coming from everywhere. They're not all coming from one place. So you don't have a driven, ideologically driven mass of people willing to risk everything and go to war.
Well, you're right about that. And you're right about they do it in their own neighborhoods too. But largely it's because that's where protests are, because
Right.
they have, the left controls the biggest cities in America. And the biggest cities are where the seats of power are. And the biggest cities are where the monuments are and the things like the statues and so on and so forth. So if conservatives come out to have a rally or a protest or a whatever, it's almost always going to be in those places. And that's where they get confronted
Right.
by leftists. And so because the leftists, in order to have these battles, would have to go into rural America and try to round some people up to have a fight with. So it is almost always going to be on their turf. And I don't think they recognize how foolish it is. Look at Ferguson, Missouri. Look at Los Angeles. Look at
Right.
Minneapolis. Look at all the places, Seattle, that have been trashed and destroyed. I mean, really, and in some cases, never rebuilt and made whole again because of this. But I still feel like they're willing to do it. There is that much hatred
Oh,
for.
there is that hatred. I attended Bob an Ashley Babbitt Freedom March and Memorial Day, and we marched from near the Capitol to the prison, which is down. So it goes southeast, and the first few blocks, several blocks on Massachusetts Avenue, heading southeast, are largely white. I imagine they're kind of low level federal employee types who live there. And the group, it wasn't more than 50 people carrying Trump flags and American flags and being peaceful. And the neighbors were so spectacularly vile. It's amazing, right? Unprompted. I mean, young women coming out there, yeah, yeah. I mean, anger, just contorting and distorting their faces. I say what I also say this in the book, Ashley. I have to show it here, just as a picture plug here. Okay. Is that our women are better looking than their women? They dress better, they care about themselves more, and their demeanors aren't distorted by this perpetual state of semi rage, and the Karenism that has overtaken the American liberal female. Uh, we don't have that. I mean, so our people will be, if we get screwed in the election, our people will be more strategic in their response, and that could
uh,
be pretty difficult uh,
yeah,
for certain people.
agreed. And don't worry, we're splashing your book cover and your website
Oh,
up and
good.
everything all over the place. We got you covered there.
Appreciate
And you're spot on. Last thing for you before we wrap here, Jack. Is all of this Donald Trump's fault just because he exists? Meaning, we were in a bad place politically and we were divided during the Bush years. I think, that's when Code Pink and everybody else, WMDs and everything else, it got really, really bad. I'd never seen a president treated the way George W. Bush was treated at the time. And then Obama comes in and, he just instantly lights the racial flame, and starts talking about if
it.
Trayvon was, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon and all this kind of thing. But even then, it wasn't as bad as it is now. And the reason I ask is, do you think there's going to be a civil war if Donald Trump is reelected? He evokes a rage that is unlike any I think I've ever seen in my lifetime. You've got maybe a few more years than I do, but there's something about. Is it something about him that could lead to a civil war if he assumes power again in 2025? Is it Donald Trump, the man, that's the reason?
Donald Trump was unlike his predecessors, Republican predecessors. Um, is impolite. He doesn't play their game, right? So you saw that the other day when he's speaking to the black journalists, right?
Yeah.
Instead of getting up there and apologizing and ducking and weaving, he goes, "That's a nasty question." Right? Okay. Uh, within a day of his coming down that elevator, they were going after him. I think part of it is they felt betrayed. I think they thought that the celebrity billionaire class was theirs, right? Just like Elon Musk is a huge figure now, is uh, is feels like a traitor to their class or their cause. One of the women I profile in the book, Dr. Simone Gold, who you probably know, a lawyer, Stanford
Mhm.
doctor, started
Right.
American Frontline Doctors, daughter of a Holocaust survivor. She said the wrath directed against her, especially by other women, is extraordinary. And she said because they think that she was a traitor to her class, right? They're supposed to play that game. And Trump didn't, and he's belligerent, fights back. But let's face it, if DeSantis had been the nominee this year, wouldn't have mattered. I mean, the rage and the anger and the fear of a Trump Republican presidency would be just as great.
In a manner of speaking, they were betrayed though too, and I think you're right. I think you nailed it because for most of his adult professional career in life, Donald Trump was a New York liberal. He was
Right?
best buds with Hillary and Bill Clinton. He was pro-abortion. He was, he was. I mean, he was like, getting awards from Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow
Right.
Coalition, and he was buddies with all of them. Suddenly, he says, "I'm going to run for president," and right before they start cheering, he says, "As a Republican," and
Right.
it's all all
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
was just forgotten. So yeah, I think that's probably a big part of it. They felt like he was theirs, and then he said, "No, I don't. I'm not owned by you or anybody else," and they didn't know how to handle it.
No, and he's Seymour Hersh called him a circuit breaker. You know, so for the uniparty to the degree it exists, the administrative state to the degree it exists, could no longer count on that person in office. They could no longer count on his compliance with their agenda, whatever it was, and they got angry very quickly. I mean, it's escalated immediately. I mean, Donald Trump, and they thought he was a joke. They promoted him. They gave him all the airtime he wanted, right?
Oh yeah, when he announced, yeah, oh
And then he
yeah,
was thrilled when he was nominated. And then they thought that the Access Hollywood tape, the drop of that, was for them like, victory in Japan Day. It's like they were celebrating. It was over. And the rhinos rushed to him and said, you got to get out. We're going to face the biggest defeat in modern electoral history. And he defied them, and he defied them because he knew the women of America better than the left did or the squishy Republicans did. 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. And I talk about this in the book. And I think part of it is because they've lived the lives, the imperfect lives that Donald Trump has. They've been through divorces and had marriages break up, and they've seen the downside of life. They listen to country western music, and it's like they've lived the lives that J.D. Vance's mother and grandmother lived. That those are Republicans today.
That's right. That's a great way to summarize that. Jack's book is Ashley, the Untold Story of the Women of January 6th. It's a story that needs to be told, which is why we're glad you wrote it, and we're glad you're here talking about it with us. Jack, thank you for the time. I appreciate it. If you do any more intrepid journalism on this subject, we would love to have you back. Thank you so much.
Well, if you ever want to take your kids or grandchildren up for a day at the beach, come on over here to a couple hours up the lake on Fredonia, New York. So.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. Be careful what I might take you up on.
Okay.
Thank you, Jack.
I appreciate it.
So thanks for watching Strictly Speaking. We appreciate it. Don't forget, if you enjoyed the conversation, if you feel like it might have some value for somebody else, share it for us on your social media. Make some comments. Let us know what you want to see next time. Thanks for watching Strictly Speaking here on True Blue. See you next time.